Now have a look at this. This is Gustave Doré's illustration of Canto 23 in Dante's Inferno, right? So in the Inferno, Canto 23, so they're down, refer back to that big picture of hell that I gave you. And this is way down. We're getting close to Satan. And now we're with Dante and Virgil. You can see them looking over, and you see all the people that they're looking at. And this is About Us Now. So in the canto, you can go and get any copy. There's zillions of copies available online, easy to see. About us now, in the depth of the pit, we found a painted people, weary and defeated. Slowly, in pain, they paced it round and round. So they're going around in pain slowly. They're a painted people. Well, that should trigger that image of painted, whitewashed tombs that we saw back Jesus pick up on in the New Testament, and that practice of whitewashing tombs, which was from the Old Testament, all about corruption. And again, the hypocrite is internally corrupted, but may look nice on the outside. Now, one of the things that Jesus talks about is that the hypocrites, don't wander around and when you're fasting or whatever, or doing anything that's a pious thing to do, like fast. You shouldn't look like you're fasting and you're in pain. That you want everybody to know, hey, that guy's fasting and he's in pain. That's also a form of whether you're let's say you're praying so that people can see you. That's a public demonstration of piety for the sake of a public demonstration of your piety, so people will know you're a good person and all that, blah, blah, blah. And that's bad. Same thing if you're fasting or undergoing some kind of sacrifice or whatever, and you do it deliberately, ostentatiously, you're doing it right out in the open so people will see it. That's the same thing. And so these hypocrites, are made to look, pained all the time, because that's kind of like this fake exterior, right? And if you notice, some of them do look quite whitewashed, right? Some of them are quite white, and then they fade off into the gray background. And there's also mention about these cloaks, and Dante talks about they kind of look like friars, certain kinds of friars that were well known for their public displays of how good they are, kind of like hearkening back to Jesus and the Pharisees. And also Dante's picking up on the theme of careful about the self-deceptive hypocrisy that Jesus sort of raises this issue of, you might trick yourself into or convince yourself that you're really better than you are, so you show all this external side of you. Well, looks great, but you're kind of lousy on the inside, but you falsely believe you're really a good person, and so you can become this self-deceptive hypocrite, and that raises the question, as I pointed out in the previous video, whether or not you can truly will yourself to believe. Can you will yourself into believing that you're a better person than you are? Well, it seems to be that there's a concern that you could do that. And of course, if you do that, you can end up in hell as a hypocrite. So Jesus is warning us, and Dante is representing this at this notion of the possibility of self-deceptive hypocrisy. And so Dante keeps that imagery of, pretty on the outside, horrible on the inside. And these great cloaks, they might look very nice because they're painted on the outside. But Dante says on the inside, they're lined with lead. So they're really, really heavy and burdensome. So kind of like the contrast of, golden and lovely, but really interior, it's lead, right? And of course, that was a common sort of trick. You would have something that's made of lead and you paint it to look like gold. And so the outside would be lovely, but the inside, it's all lead. And these leaden cloaks were extremely heavy. So the notion of the hypocrite as carrying a heavy burden that weighs the person down. It drags the soul down. So there's this notion of weight and being crushed and suppressed. Very nasty stuff when you think of it. And of course, these public displays, all this, that doesn't do anything. It doesn't save you to be the hypocrite. Again, going back to what Jesus said. Sure, people on earth might think you're great, but you're not going to fool God with that, and you're going to end up in hell. So it's going all this hypocrisy and these external things. If you're not really good on the inside, it's not going to lead to salvation. It'll lead to the opposite. It'll lead to damnation. So this is a clear sort of visual representation of a lot of ideas that we've seen that come out of, ultimately, Greek theater into the Old Testament, into the New Testament, and then in this medieval form. And the concept is just of hypocrisy is becoming more and more expanded. And so we'll see this notion of the self-deception comes out even larger when you think of writers that are not long after Dante, like Montaigne and Hobbes and Descartes. They talk about reason being something that everyone thinks that they have. Nobody complains that they're not, that God didn't give them enough reason. Everyone is like, oh yeah, I'm reasonable, I'm great. And we trick ourselves into thinking that we're much more reasonable than we probably are. Well, that's picking up on this self-deception idea. And a great thinker in the British tradition in the early 1700s was Joseph Butler. And he talks about, how people think about that they're much better than they think they are. So again, we're in this land of the self-deceiving hypocrite, is that, it's not that you're deliberately, it is that you deliberately deceived yourself. And as you're acting hypocritically, you think you're better than you are. And Butler warns in many of his sermons about all this, that, be careful, because you can easily trick yourself. Descartes says you can trick yourself easily into thinking you're way more reasonable than you are. Montaigne is always worried about that. He thinks he's more reasonable than he really is, and probably a lot of things he thinks that he's doing out of reason, he's doing out of custom. That same idea of, you think reason's doing a lot of things and you're tricking yourself is also picked up in Hume, where Hume also talks about how you think lots of things are grounded in reason. Hey, you're deceiving yourself. They're actually the result of emotions and feelings. So this notion of the mind tricking itself in a lot of ways is played out in a larger sense than just the mind tricking itself into thinking it's more moral than it really is. The mind tricks itself into thinking it's more reasonable, it's better, it's superior than what it really is. And the whole notion of what's going on here in Dante, reflecting the tradition, is to, kind of that old Socratic notion of, really understanding yourself and what and who you are, so that you may, Socrates said it was care of the soul and living a better life. But in the Christian view, it was like, well, you want to avoid hell. You don't want to be damned because you simply weren't aware of what you were really like. So Butler says that, a couple of problems is that, people don't really turn their reasoning seriously back on themselves. They're always too busy focusing it on others, right? So hence hearkening back to Jesus saying, you're busy turning all your thinking onto the mote in your neighbor's eye, not worrying about the plank in your own. So Butler will pick up on that in his sermons. And just that sort of kind of casual, people just take it for granted that they're good and whatnot, and they don't bother. Right, so there's kind of a self-deception and a kind of laziness, maybe even a little bit of sloth, where you're too lazy to look at what kind of a person you really are. You just take it for granted that you're a great person. And so this idea of self-deceiving hypocrite will become much larger. Now, it's not the only kind of hypocrite, but it becomes a much more important one, and I think in some ways more philosophically challenging, because the notion of willing beliefs comes in. But still, in literature, you have lots of these, very crafty, very self-conscious hypocrites. You find them in Dickens and of course in Molière, and of course, and we'll look at in more detail, in Shakespeare. So the concept just keeps getting expanding, richer and more interesting.